How to cite and how to avoid plagiarism? Well, we need to do both. Hello. First question is, and I'm going to work through a series of questions, is, well, what is APA? That's a question that sort of we think, well, is self-evident, or the answer is self-evident, but not really. APA is one of the citation standards, citation styles that we have alongside others. It's also the HSG standard, HSG citation standard, and it's a way of documenting sources, essentially. But it's also, and that's why I'm asking the question, it's also a guide to how to write clearly and precisely and inclusively. If you look at the APA website, its motto is to write with precision, clarity, and inclusion. So, well, why do we cite? Why do we need to cite? Again, that might seem obvious, but citation essentially has two functions. One function is a citation tells readers, well, what we've read. And secondly, it tells readers where to find what we've read in the original context. So if we don't cite, actually, we leave readers groping in the dark. They don't know where to look. They don't know what we've read. They don't know what kind of research landscape we've entered and which we want them to enter with us. This is perhaps a good point to sort of think, because I'm a linguist, to think about, well, the word to cite or citation, where does it come from? The root, of course, is Latin. Citare, to quote by way of example, authority, or proof. And the word means to summon, to summon someone, to call to attention. How to cite? Well, like all citation systems, APA has rules. And its basic rule, its basic principle is you need an author and you need a date. Those are the two essential elements of an APA citation. And that's interesting because it can happen that a source has no human author. So if I say, well, you need to cite an author, and then you find yourself on the United Nations website, you're going to say, well, who's the author? Now, APA says quite clearly that authors can be human, but they can also be non-human. Non-human means there can be an organization, an institution, a company. Anyone who holds copyright, anyone who creates content and who publishes content is therefore an author. And that's worth saying because we get a lot of questions, particularly from assessment year students, well, how do I cite the United Nations website? Well, the author, the copyright holder is United Nations. Then the next question is, well, I can't find the year of publication. Websites have copyright notices. Usually you have to scroll all the way down to the bottom, to the foot, where there is a copyright sign, where it will say United Nations and the year of in which the source, the site, has been released. Great. So, what about page references? HSG is stricter than APA in that HSG requires not only page references for direct quotations. Well, that would seem obvious, but I can tell you that we get to see a lot of material where page references are missing, also with direct citations. Now, if you say, well, a source has a page, well, then I can obviously then cite the page. What do I do with a website that has no pages? Well, I provide a paragraph or a paragraph number. I can refer my reader to a section heading. So there are always ways in which we can help readers find what we found and what we want them to find again. So HSG says, well, you need page references not only with direct quotations, but also with paraphrases. And APA is slightly fuzzy there. It's interesting, if you go onto the APA website, APA style, as it's called, the examples there are slightly confusing because in one case there'll be a page reference and in the other there won't, which is a bit unfortunate, because if you're reading a paragraph where you simply have an author date citation but no page numbers, and you sort of feel, but you are referring to certain pages but you're not citing them, so how exactly do I read this? That's why HSG is stricter. We say you need to serve your reader in the best possible way, so you provide page references also with paraphrases. Okay. Why are page references necessary? Well, if they're missing, this follows from what I was saying before, if they're missing, essentially you're going to waste the reader's time. Because if you have a source with an author date citation but no page reference, you're basically telling the reader, well, this is what I was reading, but because I've forgotten the page number, actually, well, and it's a 20-page article, you're going to have to go on a wild goose chase. Most readers will say, well, actually, I don't want to do that. I want you to tell me, I want clear instructions. So page references are user instructions, namely, this is how I want you to read this source after you've accessed it. And of course, providing page references is necessary because it is a way of complying with the best practice reporting standards. Science is about reporting standards. There's a very long section in the APA manual on reporting standards where the principle is basically, you have to accurately report all data, all evidence, because you're dealing with what kind of readers? Skeptical readers. They need to be convinced. How do you convince skeptics? Well, with evidence. Evidence being, observable, verifiable facts. So, what about plagiarism? Okay. You may have thought, well, he's going to bypass plagiarism, but obviously I can't. And I'll start with the word itself, and I could ask you, do you know the origin of the word plagiarism? It's where I always start when I do a workshop on avoiding plagiarism. I start with the word itself. To plagiarize has, in fact, a very nasty origin. A very nasty origin. You can take ancient Greek, the plagiatos, or you can take Latin, slightly less ancient, the plagiaturus. These were kidnappers. These were, in ancient Greece, these were the people, they were criminals, they were felons, who stole other people's babies and sold them. So they were human traffickers. So the origin of the word plagiarism is human trafficking, right? That's quite gruesome. That's quite gruesome. It's also interesting if one takes the first part of the word, in Latin, plaga. Plaga is a hunting tool. A plaga is a net which hunters used to throw out and catch game with, so wild animals. Okay. And I just find these metaphors very interesting. Okay, very gruesome, violent metaphors, and in fact, plagiarism is something quite violent, and that's why we need to talk about it. Okay, it essentially means you steal, and because you're stealing without giving credit or without acknowledging the fact. How to avoid plagiarism? Well, when I thought about this, or when I typed this question, I was reminded of what Ronald Reagan said about drugs. I don't know whether you ever saw this, but one of the things that Donald Reagan, when he was asked about, well, Mr. President, how are you going to stop the drug epidemic in the US? And he said, my message to everyone, especially young people, is don't do it. And of course, I could just stand here and say, well, don't do it. That would be easiest. You just say, well, don't do it. If you want to avoid something, well, you just avoid it. You avoid plagiarism, and I'm very glad that our university has given a lot of thought for this. If you, for example, go onto the FAQ on academic integrity, it says that the best way to avoid plagiarism is, in other words, to avoid stealing what is not yours, is that you take detailed notes when you're reading. Plagiarism very often starts with how you read and how you take notes or don't take notes on what you're reading. That usually is the starting point. So that one of the things that we've done at the Writing Lab is we've developed a tool that is a critical reading tool. It's very simple. It basically means you're reading an article, you're reading a book, and you jot down the bibliographical information, and then you produce a critical note. In other words, you think about, well, what is the article about? What does it argue? What methods does it use? What are its results? And then in particular, how is that article relevant? How is that source relevant to my own research? And that is a crucial question, because one of the things that readers want to know is, if I'm using a particular source, well, why am I using it? Right? And if we read with that in mind, that is how we can avoid plagiarism. Of course, we also need to know how to paraphrase, in other words, to express other people's ideas in our own words. So, do you have questions? Do you have questions? If you have questions, then I suggest you start with your Introduction to Academic Writing tutor, who's there to answer your questions. Or, of course, you can come to the HSG Writing Lab. Thank you.